Welcome back. Much has been talked about with the situation in Ukraine right now, but the establishment of a no-fly zone. It came up actually fairly early on in the invasion. It's being talked about more, and it seems every time we hear someone from the Ukrainian government speak, they always include that. They thank the West for what they are doing and what they have done, including the sanctions, but they say, look, the thing you can really help us with is if we had something like a no-fly zone. Yet we've also heard from the U.S. Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, just yesterday, talk about the fact this would not be a good idea. And, Brian, if you have that, maybe we can play that back for you just so you hear. This is the official U.S. position, right? We are not going to have this no-fly zone. But there are others thinking that if it's done, I'm going to use the word in quotation marks, correctly, it can be done without provoking an all-out war between other nations. So here's Anthony Blinken from yesterday.
The no-fly zone, to be very clear about what that involves, that means that if Russian planes violate the zone that's declared, we shoot them down. And that runs the considerable risk of creating a direct conflict between our countries and Russia, and thus a wider war, which is in no one's interest, including in the interest of the Ukrainian people. But, and I want to repeat this very clearly, when it comes to any aggression of any kind against NATO territory by Russia or anyone else for that matter, we are absolutely committed to the defense of that territory, every square inch.
Anthony Blinken from over the weekend on why there will not be in the U.S.'s determination a no-fly zone. Kurt Volker is the former U.S. envoy to Ukraine and former U.S. ambassador to NATO and is on the line right now. Mr. Volker, your position is different from Mr. Blinken's. Why?
It is because I think that the humanitarian catastrophe playing out in Ukraine deserves us to take extraordinary measures to accept a bit more risk. And I agree with Secretary Blinken that there are dangers in doing this, and we do not want a wider war. But that is precisely what we should be communicating. I also believe the Russians do not want a wider war. Their military effort in Ukraine is stalling, and it would be made worse if we were to engage in this war. They don't want that any more than we do. So we ought to be able to create a humanitarian no-fly zone where we're not aiming to strike at Russian forces or any forces as long as they stop bombing civilians from the air.
Yet they've shown no inclination to do that even today, even after every round of peace negotiations that have gone on. They violated those by, in fact, bombing those civilians again. So what hope is there that would happen?
Well, that's the whole reason that this no-fly zone is a good idea. At least take out the aircraft component that is bombing civilians. Many of these attacks on civilians from Russia are conducted by missiles and by multiple rocket launchers. So a no-fly zone would probably not even impact that very much, but at least would give some measure of support so that people could flee areas under bombardment and allow humanitarian relief to come in. Again, when I talk about limited, we're talking limited in geography, Kiev and the West not getting close to Russian borders, limited in rules of engagement, humanitarian support only, and only firing if fired upon or if Russian planes conduct attacks again from within the zone. Otherwise, making clear we are seeking to not engage Russian forces.
But how can we be sure, Mr. Volker, that Putin still wouldn't view that as an act of aggression?
Well, he probably would claim that. He's already claimed that the sanctions we've imposed are an act of aggression. The question is not so much to pay attention to what he's saying, but pay attention to what he would do. He says this in order to deter us from acting because he doesn't want us to engage at all. If we do it, I think he's going to face the consequence then of saying, does he really want to be attacking Western aircraft or not?
All right. At that point, if this, and I hate to kind of phrase it this way, this game of chicken, who's going to blink first here, continues. Every day there are more civilians dying. The U.S. position seems pretty firm from what we heard from Anthony Blinken. Yeah. When does this and how does this change? What will it take for there to be a change here, in your estimation?
Yeah. So let's remember, we said that we were not going to put sanctions on Nord Stream 2 until we did. We were not going to sanction Russian banks in the SWIFT financial transfer system until we did. We said we were not going to ban imports of Russian oil until we just did that today. And we said that we were not going to support the transfer of MiG-29s from Eastern allies to Ukraine until today. I'm worried that what's going to happen here is we're going to see a few more days of these absolutely grueling visual images of orphans escaping Kyiv, of civilians pouring out of the cities and being attacked while they do so. We're already over 2 million refugees having left the country, probably more than 2 million internally displaced. We're going to see more and more of this, and I think our publics and the Ukrainians who are very effective at communicating here will continue to raise the demands on our government to do something about it.
I heard you on Face the Nation saying that you firmly believe the Ukrainian people will, they can and they will stop Putin. So I have to ask how. How will that happen?
Well, they are not going to stop fighting. So even if the government is removed, even if the military is broken and no longer organized, the civilian population has thousands and thousands of automatic weapons, and they will form an internal resistance, and they will resist Russian rule. It'll be very, very difficult for Russia to control a country of, say, by that time, 30 million people, if 10 million leave. 30 million people with 100,000 troops, it's not going to work.
Speaking with former U.S. Ambassador to NATO, Kurt Volker. Mr. Volker, I wonder, what about the threat that Putin raised last week about that nuclear option? How serious should that be taken?
Well, we do have to take it seriously at all times. No one wants to see nuclear weapons used, and that is something I think we should be communicating. I thought the U.S. statement that we are not raising our alert level was a good statement. We don't want to raise nuclear tensions. We also need to be communicating that we will not tolerate any use of nuclear weapons, and that would drag us into a conflict if there was a use of nuclear weapons.
Can I just ask you as a last question as we wrap up, are you hopeful that this will end well? And when I say well, without more people dying?
Yeah, there is no ending well. This is an absolute catastrophe. Thousands have died. Millions are refugees. Civilian infrastructure destroyed. If everything were to stop today and Putin were to turn his forces around and leave, this would be devastating for Ukraine and take decades to overcome.
Okay. Reality check there. Natasha?
I think I'd like to just ask if you think that President Biden is taking the right approach, if he's doing what needs to be done here.
Well, look, the U.S. and Europe have done a lot, and you got to give credit for that, for the $1 billion worth of military assistance, the acceleration of the speed of that, the massive sanctions on Russia's economy, the ban on oil and gas today. But I have to say that everything we have done could have been done earlier and could have been done more fulsomely at the time, rather than a half step and then follow through and then another half step and then another half step. This is dire for the people of Ukraine. Everything that we can do and probably will do in the future, we should have done yesterday.
But okay, let me just ask the last question. Speed of implementation aside, as you just lined out, ultimately this will not be enough to stop Putin, will it?
The sanctions will not be enough to stop Putin. The sanctions will hurt the Russian economy. It may cause people in Russia eventually to say that Putin is driving them into the ground and something has to be done about that. But Putin is driven on a military conquest of Ukraine. And the only thing that's going to stop him there is our assistance to the Ukrainian people, military and government, so they can fight back and prevent Putin from taking over the country. That's got to be the heart of our effort, and accelerated and expanded as much as we can.
Mr. Volker, thank you so much for your time. Very much appreciated.
Thank you.
Kurt Volker, former U.S. ambassador to NATO. We shall see. When he said, we said we wouldn't, but we did. We said we wouldn't, but we did.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, will this be the same? We said we wouldn't, but we will, as far as a flyover, no-fly zone?
All that message sends is that we're not keeping our word, right? We're changing. We say this is our stance, and then we change it again and again.
Will that happen again?